Hello, everyone. My name is Lakey Lude, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the MHS Talent Insights Series live panel session titled Select to Succeed with our esteemed partners, Janice, Gair, and Heather Lee, as well as MHS's Ed Hennessy and hosted by Carlos Cadogan, MHS Talent Recruitment Sales Consultant. We are thrilled to have you all with us today. For those of you joining for the first time, welcome. We would like to begin by telling you a bit about MHS Talent Development. For over 40 years, MHS has provided trusted data-driven solutions across our core disciplines. Our MHS Talent Solutions help to drive success in professional settings. We understand the elements of effective leadership and the requirements for an effective workplace. With our capabilities and tool sets, we help clients identify and cultivate talent. Now, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our panel. Carlos Cadogan is a talent selection and development consultant for MHS. He is certified to coach individuals in emotional intelligence, change style, influence style, and resiliency. Carlos passionately supports selection, workplace, and leadership development programs for all businesses and industries, including Fortune 500 organizations, government agencies, educational institutions, recruiters, talent acquisition companies, and consulting firms. Next, we have Ed Hennessy. Ed is a proud U.S. Army veteran and has 15 plus years of executive coaching and recruitment experience. Ed was a leading international provider of certification training in the EQI and 360, Pearman Personality Integrator, and the Hardiness Resilience Gauge. Ed worked with professionals from over 35 countries to support their leadership development needs. Next, we have Janice Gair. Janice is co-founder of EI Advantage. She has over 2 decades of experience in corporate strategy, human resources, and organizational development working internationally. She is a certified professional in human resources, professional certified coach, and is a trainer in the EQI, change style, and hardiness resilience gauge with MHS. Last but not least, we have Dr. Heather Lee. Heather is a co-founder and partner with North Carolina-based Developmental Associates. Heather holds an MS and PhD in industrial organizational psychology and is a certified senior professional in human resources. As an organizational consultant, she specializes in nonprofit, public, and education sectors. Heather is a passionate advocate for assessing and developing emotional intelligence in the workplace. That is our panel. Over to you, Carlos.
Thank you so much, Lakey, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone out there who's participating. Let's talk about the monkey in the room, or the elephant in the room. My voice decided to take a break today. I guess it needed some me time. And so along your journey today, if you happen to bump into it, please return it to me with a sound check and hopefully a cup of lemon ginger tea. I'm really excited to be hosting today. I'm excited for the panel. I want to thank the panelists for joining today, and we're going to have a great conversation. What we want to do is break up the questions into 4 parts. So we want to talk about selection, what it is, what it's not. We're going to talk about things from a strategic perspective, benefits / potential pitfalls, and then of course applications. At the very end, if there's any questions that come up, please write them down. And I think at the end of the session, we'll have time to field some of your questions. So again, apologize for my voice. Hopefully you can bear with it for the next 45 minutes. So anyways, panelists, thanks so much for joining me today. Let's get started talking about all things selection. So Janice, if I can start with you, this would be great. I want to talk to you a little bit about, as we're talking about a selection here, and of course we're talking a little bit about assessments here today and how we use them for selection. Why would or how would somebody use assessments? Why would they even use assessments for selection?
Thanks, Carlos. I think let's start a little higher level. I think all of us are trying to make better decisions these days in a variety of different ways. When we're looking at selection, you want to try and incorporate some data-driven decision-making processes into your system. So performance validated metrics like using assessments or work samples or simulations, we'll be talking about all different things today, help you make better decisions and help you align your selection to meet your company's goals.
I like that. That's good. Data insight simulations. Let's talk about that a little bit later. Before even going further, let's talk about selection. So how would you define what selection is? Because sometimes there could be some misconceptions, and maybe I'm just projecting my own learning curve onto you. But can you talk a little bit about defining what selection actually is?
Sure. A lot of times we see recruitment and selection tied together. And so recruitment is about, sending out your fishing net. How are you going to catch those fish? How are you going to get those candidates in order to come and respond to your job post? But selection is just part of this recruitment process, and it's the most important part. It's when you're trying to identify which person is going to be the best to come work at your organization. And all of the steps you use in your selection process are set up for that long-term success for the individual and for your organization. So selection process can include screening, preliminary interviews, assessments or tests like we're talking about, work samples, simulations, background checks, as well as, finally you're getting to your offering, your hiring process, and making sure you have an onboarding process for that person. So selection is really quite an all-encompassing process.
Interesting. Yeah, that's good. That's good information. Heather, hi, how are you?
Hi.
Good. Again, apologize for my voice. I know we just talked a little bit about the differences there, but can you maybe explain to me a little bit more for the group here, what recruitment then is in this whole kind of, ecosystem of selection? When does recruitment kind of come in?
So I think to build on Janice's remarks, the quote I love is by Jim Collins in Good to Great, which is that you have to get the right people on the bus and then you get them in the right seat. And so I believe that recruitment is getting the right people and attracted to your company, and then the selection process is getting them in the right seat. And so I think about recruitment as a marketing adventure, right? I think all too often, some employers see, and I run into this with some of our clients, they think they're the best thing since sliced bread, and they don't feel that they need to make the effort with candidates. And the reality is, with the low employment market that we have right now, at least in the United States, but also pipeline problems that we have in terms of having candidates with the right skills even available, particularly when you add in diversity, then we've got to do a really good job of marketing our organizations. And that's really what recruitment is. Recruitment is marketing your organization to attract the right eyeballs to your advertising and to attract the right eyeballs to your organization. So they're enthused to go through all the steps in the selection process, because let's be honest, we ask candidates to jump through lots of hoops to get to our organization. But if we're not marketing properly to them, we're not going to capture the right eyeballs.
That's really, really insightful. I love that bus. I've never heard that before. I love that. It's a great example. Ed, how you doing?
Good, Carlos.
Good. And thanks for that, Heather and Janice. If I could ask you a question, Ed, with your experience, just to educate myself and the audience here, is what are some of the biggest misconceptions around selection? I know we talked a little bit there about the difference between recruitment and selection, but are there any other kind of misconceptions that we should be aware of when it comes to selection?
Absolutely. I think one of the, there may be a number of them. One of the biggest ones, and I reached out to a good friend of mine who's the CEO of a successful executive search firm. And it seems like, the old adage was hire for fit and train for skill. And that seemed to be kind of a philosophy that was used for quite some time. But he said, Ed, it's really changed now because, and Heather mentioned this too, the lack of skilled candidates, that sometimes companies fall in love with the person because they feel like they're going to be the right fit. They don't necessarily have the skill that's needed, and they allow that to sort of overshadow their decision and influence their decision. And they go ahead and bring that person on board, and maybe they're the right fit, but they don't work out because they don't have the skill. And so I think and he said, what's really key now is, he said, it really needs to be a balance for both. He said, you can hire for fit over skill to a point. And what he was mean by that to a point is, if you're going to do that, you have to have a plan for, and I think Heather mentioned this as well, you have to have a plan for onboarding. So if your candidate is lacking certain skills, you can't bring them on board and expect them to be successful without a plan to help them be successful. So whether it's upskilling or leveling up their skills and what they need. So I think that's probably the biggest misperception right now, is that, you know, in this, you can still hire for fit and worry about skill later. You really can't.
Interesting. I love that. That's some good insight from your colleague there. Janice, I think we kind of just talked about a couple of things Heather mentioned, Ed just mentioned, and you mentioned at the top, but selection seems to be a really hot topic right now. So, so what do you think it is? I think we kind of tease a little bit, but maybe talk more about it. Is why right now are so many organizations and individuals focus on selection right now?
Yeah, and we're hearing it from all the members on this panel, is that the labor market is getting more competitive. And we all want to have the best people in our organizations. We are also noticing that the pace of change is exceptional. So there's a need not only for those skills that we need, the competencies we need, those baseline skills to know that people can do the job, but there's also how flexible they are. How are they going to adapt to change? Because we know the job that we're hiring them for today is probably going to evolve. It may not be the job or the needs that we need them to be completing in the future. So there's big advancements in tech. Candidates' expectations are shifting. I'm a bit of a dinosaur, Carlos. I remember my first job, and I was just happy to have a job. My parents said, go get a job, and I went and got one, right? And what we're seeing now is candidates are looking for certain things in terms of their lifestyle, all those types of things. So it's becoming much more complex to really get that winning combination. And so we're looking at those competencies, as Ed is mentioning, and we're also looking at those emotional intelligence skills around adaptability, how they're going to build relationships, how they're going to manage stress.
You're so true. You're not a dinosaur. Because if you are, so am I. You're right, though. But I remember when I first started working, my expectations were to get paid every 2 weeks and to work for somebody who isn't too difficult to get along with. I mean, that was really the bar. The bar was incredibly low. But now, I think for a good reasons, employees expect more and deserve more. So that's a great point. Heather, hi again. You said something, I don't want to tease it too much because hopefully you talk about it, but you did mention the word, the challenges with recruitment, marketing, and things like diversity. And so can you maybe help us understand some of the biggest challenges? I think we now understand the importance of it and why we're so focused on it. But now let's start thinking about the things that make us kind of nervous. What's the challenges that we're facing as we're trying to select those right people?
I've identified 5, and there may well be more, but I've sort of captured it in 5 that are things that are that in my day-to-day work are really have given my hairstylist job security for color. So one is, we've talked about this a little bit already, it's a tight employment market in many places. It's tight both in terms of warm bodies, but we don't just, to Ed's point, want to have butts in seats. We want to have qualified butts in seats, and it's not just about fit. And so we need to have quick hiring decisions. We know that the younger millennials and older Generation Z turn over faster. So we see increasing turnover in organizations, and we see increasing turnover not just because of generational differences, but also employers are not as loyal. And so why, to their employees, so why would employees be as loyal to their employers? So that's one thing, the need to hire quickly, but we also have to do it while we're vetting them thoroughly, to Ed's point about fit and skills. We need to find the affordable, diverse, best fit, highly qualified person with aptitude. Like, that's a mouthful, right? But that's what every employer wants. They want the person who fits, who's diverse, who's inclusive, who has, and diverse can mean all kinds of things. What, fill in the blank, whatever diverse quality. And then there are three things that I've come up that are really specific to what we're going through, I think, globally right now. One is over-relying on interviews as the sole assessment tool. With the new capabilities that are necessary, we need to have other ways of assessing. And Janice and Ed both have talked about these. So it's not just an interview. We think in our business and teach people interviews are necessary but not sufficient. So that's number one. Number two is over relying on IQ and not realizing that the higher you go up the ladder, IQ gets you into the career band, but it's not what makes you successful. We literally can all visualize somebody right now, if we think about it, is the person with super duper high Mensa brain IQ who couldn't work their way out of a cardboard box if their interpersonal skills and empathy depended on it. And so we've got to measure those other things because we know, particularly for leadership, that IQ is not going to be sufficient, that you need those other things on top of it. And then the last thing, the fifth point, is the blessing and curse of artificial intelligence. Because when we're assessing candidates, we are relying that it's their words coming out of their mouth. We are relying on the fact that it's their work product they've produced, whether it's answering surveys or written work, it's their presentation they created. Well, with the advent of AI, we can't have those same level of guarantees. We have to come up with new ways of paying attention to that piece. And yet, AI is also a blessing because from the employer's perspective, it can help you design that very job-specific simulation or those job-specific behavioral-based interview questions. So I think, as human resource consultants, as employers, as the field of human resources globally, we are just scratching the surface on that piece, and we haven't fully wrapped our arms around it.
Wow, that's great. That's the list there. And I love what you said about diverse because, right, diverse, we think of diversity, you think of, frankly, someone looks like me versus someone who may look like you, or genders, but diverse is diverse of thought, diverse of education, diverse of experiences, diverse of locations, right? All those things, because to all of your points so far is looking to hire people who are adaptable and ready for change because change is happening to the organization. So I love those points. Thank you for that. And I think Heather kind of, I got a question for you, and I think Heather kind of nicely teed us into it is what are the future trends of selection that you see happening right now that organizations need to leverage to make a better decision?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, and Heather, thank you for opening the door. It's the rise of the machines, right? So I remember, I don't know, maybe Janice and Heather will remember this. Remember when we used to ask candidates to fax us their resumes? Right? And we didn't store things in the cloud. We stored them on a Rolodex, right?
Yeah.
So some of us may still even use a Rolodex. It's effective. But, we had floppy disks, and now we have artificial intelligence. And it reminded me of that commercial. And I don't know if it's an Apple AI commercial, but I think it's a guy named Walter, and he's writing an email to his boss, and he talks about this project needs a little zhuzhing.
Yeah.
And the AI interprets it for him and sends off this really well-articulated, descriptive, informative email, and his boss is shocked to get it from him. That's the world we're in. And I think as Heather mentioned, it's a blessing and a curse. There's obstacles and opportunities on either side. But I think for most organizations right now, just like there was a survey study done by CareerBuilder, it said that the typical HR manager right now loses about 14 hours a week due to manual inputting tasks that artificial intelligence could automate. Right, so there's some efficiency benefits as well. But I think starting off slow for the automation, like the job description, the things that are manual, the job descriptions, the screening of the resumes, right, the scheduling, all of those things that can be automated need to be taken advantage of. So, and then, where we go from there. And then there's, the CEO friend of mine that I talked to, we even talked about artificial intelligence, and he talked about, I asked him about the role of it in hiring, and he said, it's definitely growing, but he said, Ed, also the role of artificial intelligence in determining who gets fired. And that was kind of a shock to me. Because as organizations think about, layoffs and how does artificial intelligence play into that type of perspective, I mean, it's something to really consider. So I think, it needs to be carefully done. It needs to be done step by step. But the trends here, it's already here. But I think companies need to have a plan for how they want to roll it out and start with those more tasks. The administrative tasks can be more automated than anything else.
Wow, that is scary. I never heard that before. AI for firing. And it also scared me how much you're aging us here, talking about fax machines, floppy disks, and Rise of the Machines. That's the third movie from the Terminator trilogy, the least of the ones that are good. I think we've lost our audience now, depending on their age. Okay, no, that's great though. Thanks for that. Janice, question for you before my voice decides to quit again. So we talked about diverse thought. We just talked about AI. We talked about the challenges of the market. Heather mentioned people wanting to change, turnover, lack of employee and employer kind of commitment to each other. So how do you succeed now making selection? Like, what's the winning formula? Like, how do you know you're making the right decision, and how do you know that you're being successful?
Yeah, so I think it starts with being strategic and clear in your objectives for what it is you're trying to achieve. You know, it's about make the plan and work the plan. As we're hearing, the recruitment and selection process is complicated these days. And so being clear on your objectives of what it is that you feel you need, the person you feel you need in order to come in and be successful in your organization, comes with having a really good plan. And a discussion around, you know, what does that look like? What does success look like for the organization? And also important, what does success look like for the individual? Because as we're hearing, you know, individuals have expectations too. So following a plan where you've had that discussion, have a combination of data-driven tools, assessments, other things to help you make better decisions is very important. And also leaning into those what we call essential skills, sometimes they're called soft skills, around that emotional intelligence piece. People do not work in isolation anymore. The majority of people in organizations are working in teams. And while we've heard artificial intelligence, the blessing and the curse, the bottom line is innovation comes from people. And so when you're adding people to your organization, you want them to be able to have those skills in order to work across teams and be able to build things collectively. And so I think the organizations that weigh both those really required competencies, as well as those EQ or emotional intelligence skills, are having the more successful outcomes.
And I wanted to add on to that, if that's okay, to what Janice said, just as a real world example. One of our clients over the past years was the U.S. Navy nuclear program. So we provided some EQI certification training to some people that were leaders in the U.S. Navy nuclear program. And this is one of the most comprehensive, robust, difficult engineering programs in the world. And so, and they're obviously a group of very high IQ people. And I asked their leaders, what are you looking for emotional intelligence to do? Like, you've got these brilliant people. They're on Navy nuclear submarines. They're all types of Navy nuclear engineering backgrounds. What's missing? And he said, what we need is, we have had a lot of really smart people. We need these really smart people to be able to work together under stress and pressure when things don't go well. And they said, that is not IQ, that's EQ. So we need EQ to be equally as important as IQ, because that's what's going to be successful in our environment.
Interesting. I love that. Thank you. Thank you, Janice, for bringing us back to modern times with the word data. Thank you, Ed, for referencing floppy disks again, or cassette tapes, or VHSs. No, that's really interesting. So I'm going to throw a curveball question, because we've talked about it a couple times here, and I don't want to get too far. We talk about the importance of emotional intelligence as we get higher up in the leadership chain. So I'm just throwing this out there for anyone who's willing to take it. When using something like emotional intelligence or an assessment like that, what are some of the things that you want to be, how do you set that up? Like, if I wanted to say, hey, you know what, I've listened to this panel today, great, I want to start thinking about that, thinking about, oh yeah, I'm great, it's happy that Carlos technically knows what to do, but now I want to make sure that he's successful for us and for himself to lead. How would we leverage that emotional intelligence? So Heather, maybe I could throw that off to you. I know it's an off-ball question, but can you maybe high level, think about, how would I then use emotional intelligence or an assessment like that to help me with my selection?
So I think that one of the things that I love about the MHS EQ suite, whether it's the 2.0 or the 360, is that it can be used in a variety of ways. And one of the ways that employers can use the 2.0 in particular is in the selection process. And I think, we know it's validated for selection. We know, for example, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, as great a tool as that might be for team building, is not validated for selection. So you want to make sure that you're using tools that are legally defensible, that meet your, national, regional, provincial laws, et cetera. And I think that there are a couple of different ways to do that. For internal candidates, sometimes they will put them in a development space to build them for succession planning. So they might do 360s and start introducing them into the tasks that they might do in advance. And we've used that model several times for police chiefs, for planning directors, for city and county managers, sort of preparing them in advance, knowing that a company or an organization had an allegiance to hiring from within first, right? They're never guaranteed the job. They've got to walk through these places, but that's one opportunity. The other is to do a self-assessment that you share with clients or you share with the decision makers within the organization after they've used other methods, because you can't just use the emotional intelligence assessment alone for lots and lots of reasons that we can go into if you desire, but using that as adjuvant in addition to other tools like job simulations, like written assessments, like interviews, and so on and so forth. What I tell our clients is that when I'm looking for is the comparison of how the candidate sees themselves with how they performed. And I'm looking for convergence or divergence. So does the candidate's self-assessment match with how they showed up, or is it different? And then if it's different, that requires more investigation on the part of the client or the employer, the decision makers. And as Janice referenced earlier, of course, you've got to check references, you might do background checks and so on and so forth. And so that's sort of the final piece. But I see EQ is absolutely fundamental in both embedded, because it can be embedded in the simulations, it can be embedded in interview questions, but also as that companion tool of that self-assessment, because I think it really is a great tool for determining self-awareness. Obviously that's something that many employers wish their employees had more of.
Right. Oh, that's great. And I love what you said there about the divergence, because it speaks to what you and Janice and Ed were saying earlier about AI and about maybe questioning, is this Carlos's, showing up answering these questions, or is this AI? Checking for that divergence with an assessment like that can help inform to say, hey, he's showing up a little bit differently than maybe what he was telling us or what the machine was telling us. I love that. That is great. Janice said, I know that was kind of a off-ball question. Anything to add to that? That was really great. Anything else? Any other comments? And no pressure.
No pressure. I thought Heather did a fantastic job. No surprise. You're looking to always validate as you go through your process. And I really do think that when we're looking at, what we're reading about someone, what we're hearing about them, what credentials they have, how they show up in that interview, you need something that is not subjective, not your impression or your opinion. You need some data-driven tools to help evaluate what you're seeing.
I would add on to that too, just, and Heather really did a phenomenal job, but knowing what you're looking for. And what do I mean by that? Knowing how do successful leaders show up in your organization? What is the emotional intelligence or EQ profile of a leader who's successful in your organization? Because we might think, well, that's going to be somebody that has a lot of high scores across the board. Well, potentially, but I'll give you a real world example. There was an organization we worked with a couple of years ago. There was a group of senior VPs of HR, and across the board, these are all senior level leaders leading the organization. But because they were in a culture that was very collaborative, they made decisions as a team based on everything. Their score of independence was maybe mid-range, was like, right around 100 to maybe 105. Now, just somebody off the street who doesn't understand the nature of the assessment might look at that and think, well, this leader's not going to have, or this leader's going to have challenges with being independent or decisive. And it really wasn't the case. It was their usage of the skill supported success in their culture, because their sort of mid-range use of independence supported a culture of really strong collaboration. So when I say you want to understand what you're looking for, is know what the profile of a leader in your organization looks like from a successful EQ perspective.
Interesting. Love that. Thanks, Ed. That's great. And thanks for that conversation, everyone. Ed, I'm going to stick with you. So we just kind of talked about some of the benefits of using an assessment and understanding what you're looking for. I want to talk about something that's a little bit, I would say touchy, but can be is culture. And so we've heard the word culture fit a couple of times, and I'll be honest, I'll show my bias here. When I hear someone say, I want to hire for culture fit, my shoulders kind of go up a little bit. And the reason for that is I find that, we all say that we want to have someone for culture fit, but often most organizations don't understand the complexities of the culture within the organization, right? So a lot of organizations have their value statements, their mission statements. That's great. And at a very high level, maybe in the lower level organization, you can recite them. But there's something about words versus actions, of course, as well. Right? Carlos can say we're an empathetic company and I'm here to see you and value you, but in my actions, that's not the case. And so I want to talk, if you can answer for me, Ed, a little bit. What is the role of selection and culture fit, and what are some of the things that organizations and individuals think about when we're talking about culture fit and selection?
Well, I guess I'd like to start at first by saying how important it is. There's a quote from a gentleman his name was General Eric Shinseki. He was the 34th Army Chief of Staff, and his quote, and he was a former military commander of mine, and he's talking about legacy equipment in the military and the transition to a modern battlefield. And he basically said, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And Janice sort of mentioned this. It's a culture of adaptability. What does that look like in our organization? Really, it boils down to a transformational culture. All organizations are going through change. We've heard it talked about a couple of times already, the pace of change that's taking place. The pace of change that's taking place is accelerating. So if you, like, another real world example is Stephen Elop, the CEO of Nokia, in his final press conference when Nokia was acquired by Microsoft, he said in front of a group of press people, he said, I don't know how we got here. We didn't do anything wrong. But what they didn't do right is they didn't adapt. And so I think when we think about culture, we have to think about the ability to adapt. Now, there's a lot goes into culture, and culture really is the driver of organizational success, because it's made up of human behavior, which drives organizational performance. But understanding what that looks like in an organization, and I think a key element is the ability to adapt, which is sort of a transformational culture. But then you want to drill that down into what are the human behaviors that would support that. And just so happens we have the EQI leadership report that's got 4 leader dimensions of authenticity, coaching, insight, and innovation. Those leader dimensions are based on research around a transformational leadership culture. So just with the EQI 2.0 leadership report alone, we can link to what a transformational culture looks like and their ability to adapt, for leaders to be able to be adaptable for the future.
Love that. Thanks, Ed. That's insightful. I love that. Janice, Carlos here. Again, we just talked about culture. I want to kind of wrap up this section and move on. But so now we understand. We want to talk about the EQI, and Heather did a really great job there explaining how to use it. Ed just talked a lot, which is great, about culture and culture fit. So to kind of wrap this up, this little portion is the impact of selection now to that, right? I'm an organization, I want to keep, either I'm struggling or maybe I'm maintaining, I want to keep that adaptable, collaborative organization continuing. What is the selection impact and the importance of it to that organization?
Yeah, well, I think many of us listening, and I'm sure my colleagues on the panel as well, has seen what an organization goes through when the selection process goes wrong. And at the end of the day, it can cost a lot of money. It can cost reputational damage, bad morale, high turnover, all sorts of things. So the stakes are really high when you're doing a selection, and very, very high when you're looking at leadership these days. On the other side, when you get it right, you've got retention, turnover, satisfaction. You probably have alignment of values within the organization. You have a leader driving the organizational values. There's alignment with individuals that they are living their, perhaps even their core purpose as they're working with your organization to achieve results.
That's interesting. I have a question here. I'll start with you, Heather, but I think I want everyone to join in. You know, I read an article not too long ago about a study in the UK about accidental leaders. It was a high, I can't remember the exact number, but say it's something like 60% of leaders are actually accidental leaders, which means, as an example of Carlos is a great employee at MHS, he's been here for 5 years, we like him, he's really great at pivot tables, and now we're going to make him a leader. Well, there's a skill set gap there, right? If we don't train Carlos maybe instinctively may have the ability and capabilities to be a great leader, but what if he doesn't? Just because he's been a great employee doesn't mean now he's great at leading. And so often the selection, it's us, those same leaders are the ones now being tasked to select. So again, great at pivot tables, not so great at leading. And now I'm asked to select people with or without an assessment. So Heather, put this pressure on you before my voice caves again. From your experience, what are some examples of good selection in practice, in real practice, if you don't mind?
Yeah, well, I think let me comment on your intro just for a second, which is the number of people who are it used to be called the Peter principle, promoted to their level of incompetence because they're great at pivot tables, and I will let them supervise budgets and lots of people with no skills. And I think the mistake that a lot of organizations still make today is that they're not training for people to be leaders before they're leaders. They wait until they're a leader and then they give them the training. And sometimes that training shows up a year or two later. Well, in that time, as you point out, they're making hiring decisions, but they don't. Well, what we know about humans is that we hire in our own likeness, and you know, unless there's some guardrails in place. And so I think that a few things that are really important, and Janice and Ed both have alluded to this, is using a variety of assessment tools. You know, using not just interviews, which basically can measure knowledge and they can measure oral communication, but they don't measure writing ability. They don't measure presentations, coaching, meeting facilitation. You can ask somebody what they would do, but of course, what I would do is not necessarily what I've done. You can say, what have you done? But of course, I'm going to paint it in a good way. If I'm, you know, whether I'm honest or not, I'm going to paint it in a good way. And we hope that there's a high correlation between those two things. So using a variety of assessment tools, I think, is really critical. I think involving multiple stakeholders in the process. I think the leader who is not, who thinks that he or she can do it all. And you know, I hear leaders all the time say, well, I'll know in 5 minutes if this is a good fit or not, or I trust my gut. And I think that having multiple stakeholders in the process both allows you to have buy-in by the stakeholders in the hiring decision, but also people look for different things. Each human has something different they're paying attention to, right? So if you have multiple stakeholders involved, if, you know, Carlos is focused on pivot tables and Janice is focused on interpersonal skills and Ed's focused on, you know, independence, we're going to be paying attention to different things, and the collective whole of our perspectives makes a better selection decision. I think that, you know, making sure that we are paying attention to the candidate process, both internal and external, is really critical. I think sometimes we're not paying attention to transparency, letting people know in advance, what does it take to get to the next level internally? And then what is the selection process going to look like? We often, it can be a mystery for folks. And we know when we want candidates to show up to perform, we don't want them having the anxiety of not knowing what's going to happen. And, not being blindsided by getting a link from MHS that you now have to do an assessment, for example, right? Like being transparent about the process, and then giving feedback where you can to candidates, because as I said in the very opening question to me about recruitment, you're marketing your company every second of your interaction with an internal or external candidate up until they start working. And then you're continuing to market to them because you want to retain them. And so I think creating that candidate experience both during the process and following the process is also an important part of the practice.
I love that, Heather. I was actually writing down here in my agenda, showing my age again here. I'm not typing on my computer. What I heard was basically, and Janice alluded to this earlier, and so did Ed, is having a criteria. I think we'd all be pretty amazed of how many organizations don't have a clear criteria of making decisions. Again, I'm not ratting people who do pivot tables. This isn't a knock on pivot tables, but Carlos, that accidental leader, he's making the decision. So what I heard from you was transparency. What I heard was clarity. What I heard was objectivity, and really important, heavy one that I think we all don't want to acknowledge is self-interest. Like when you said trying to hire somebody like myself, that's the word I heard was self-interest. What self-interest is at play? And that self-interest may not always be serving the ultimate outcome that we're looking to achieve. So that was great. Thank you.
I think.
Let me build?
Yeah.
I just want to build on your point about, what the job looks like. One of the things that we know is critical is it's not just a job description or the ad, right? It's what is the organization, because the person who's exiting, they may or may not have been a good performer, to Ed's point. What is the profile of a good performer? Also, the job may have changed. Maybe there's more adaptability now. Maybe there's a new product that's coming down the line. So what is the person that's needed in the job now, as opposed to the person who exited, who's been there 20 years, and doing some kind of organizational analysis, not just a job task focus, but what are the challenges and opportunities for the organization, the position, and getting at what does that ideal person look like today based on what that profile looks like. What are other successful people doing? I think Ed's point of what is that comparison point for other successful leaders in an organization is a wonderful way of getting at that.
Love that. I think both Ed and Janice, you had something to add there. Please do.
Go ahead, Ed.
I just wanted to highlight, thank you, Janice. I just wanted to highlight what I really heard. And I hope everybody was taking notes, whether they were typing or writing it down, either or. I think what what Heather just really described to me was the framework for a very successful succession planning program. So growing those leaders internally within the organization. We had a client come into certification a long time ago to specifically use the EQ 360 for their succession planning, and they had a very simple state: is our leader ready now? But ready now was a very comprehensive point in time where it involved everything that Heather was talking about. They've gone through assessments, they've gone through coaching, they've gone through mentoring, they've gone through development, they've hit certain milestones or goals or objectives. But it was something, and Heather mentioned the keyword transparency. It was transparent to the entire organization, so there were no hidden agendas. Everybody from top to bottom knew so-and-so was ready now. They knew exactly what that meant. So there was just a clarity within the organization of this leader's ready to go forward.
Love that. Janice.
I'll just add on that within the succession planning process, one of the benefits of the EQI 2.0 tool is that you can retest. So I know a lot of clients that we work with that use that as part of their succession planning process. We work with people. We have a baseline of their emotional intelligence. We understand the top performer leader qualities that they're looking for, and we coach people towards those goals. And then as we work through things with them, we have the ability to retest and reset the baseline. So it's an incredibly credible tool.
Love that. I love that. I love the retesting capability there, Janice. And Ed, I love what you said, which helped me remind me something I wanted to say was selection isn't just about selecting somebody from outside the organization. Right? We're talking about selecting people internally. That's selection. And I think as a default, maybe again projecting, when I think of selection, I think of outside coming in, but really we're also talking about, you know, those emerging leaders in our organization and how we select them and how we can leverage, to Heather's point, giving them the skills before they get the job, you know, not a year or two later when the behaviors have been, you know, kind of exuded and expressed, and now we want to change it. So I love that. We're coming up to almost 10 minutes of the hour, so I want to leave time for questions. So I want to talk about a couple of other kind of, I don't know, controversial things, but let's talk about ethics. Okay, so part of, I think some of it is, yeah, not having a framework, you know, tapping again, ragging on pivot tables, tagging Carlos, the pivot table king, to select for me doesn't have that skill, but now we want to use an assessment. Is that okay? I know, Heather, I'm going to leave this with you because you mentioned something which I'm sure you'll talk about again, but how does ethics play a role in selection? What do we have to look for to safeguard ourselves as individuals and organizations to not only make sure we're selecting the right people, but now I'm talking about like ethically not to get myself in trouble. How do I make sure I'm using assessments in the right way to select candidates?
So I think that, you know, ethics start with understanding the job. I think it's important, you know, just to build on the last part of the conversation, that you do have an understanding of the role in the organization, because only then can you figure out what the selection process is. What a lot of organizations do is they use the same selection process. They even trot out the same interview questions, regardless of the role, instead of actually tying what the job needs and matching that with the different processes. So I think from an ethical perspective, one thing is making sure you understand the job in the organization and what they're looking for, and then selecting the tools that are appropriate to measure those things, not just assuming the way we've always done things can work. I think another ethical piece is that, and I alluded to this previously, is that you have to use tools that are valid for selection. Here in the United States, an interview is considered a test, just like it was a paper pencil test that you take in high school, right? An interview is legally considered a test. So everything you design for hiring here in the United States legally could get you in trouble because it's a test. And so that's why doing that organizational assessment is so important, but also picking tools that are legally defensible and valid is, in my mind, the most important thing. So we know that the EQI 2.0 is valid for selection because there's been copious amounts of testing to make sure it's a valid tool to use. Not every tool out there, just because you love it, is meant to be used for selection. And that's a really important distinction. And then a third part of ethics, in my mind, is the process itself, which is who do you involve in the panel? Do you stack it with people who all look like you in terms of whatever your demographics are? Do you stack it in terms of people who all think like you? To me, that's unethical, right? I'm a big proponent in hiring your opposite to be successful. You know, from an ethical standpoint, are you making decisions in a way that are important and valid? In other words, so you get, you know, let's say you don't trust your gut, you use rubrics or answer keys that are objective based on all the things that you've decided in advance, not that you're building the plane while flying, but you've decided in advance, this is what we're looking for, you create measures against that. Then the important thing becomes, you know, what are we doing to make sure that we're measuring that and making decisions around that effectively, and not just picking the lowest scoring person or picking the person we like the best. So that decision-making piece at the end, it is fraught with ethical dilemmas.
Interesting. I love that. I could talk to you guys all day about this. For those in the audience, there might be some freezing technical issues. We're back. Hopefully you can see me. I love that so much. I love that diversity of hiring my opposite. The people around me are making decisions, right? All of us have some level of bias in it. It's okay. It doesn't make us mean or malice. It's the nature of being a human. So always checking for that is really, really important. I know we got 9 minutes left and I want to leave time for questions, but I want to hit on 2 things really, really quick if we can. Janice, I'll start with you. Based on what Heather just talked about, when should, where should the selection strategy start from in an organization? Who should be kicking that off? When should we be taking that on, before we start, marketing ourselves as trying to select people? When should that start?
Yeah, so I've got sort of 5 application tips. One is defining the clear objectives, and that might involve a discussion within your organization. Updating your job description or your requirements. People are busy out there, and sometimes we pull what's been on the shelf for a long time and we go with it. So practice that pause and make sure that you've got your what you're looking for identified appropriately. Define your selection criteria would be number 3. Number 4, determine your selection methods. We've heard a lot of them today. And lastly, as Heather mentioned, be clear on your evaluation process, scoring, ranking, whatever you're using, and have that in place before the train leaves the station. And so some quick tips for you.
Thanks, Brian. I love that. I love those 5. Clarity is the word, right? Clarity. Who's making the decision? How is it being made? And making sure everybody knows what that is, right? I think that's really, really important. Ed, one last thing for you before we kind of go to questions and wrap up. Listen, let's talk about the elephant in the room other than my terrible Boyz II Men impersonation voice that I'm doing today. Again, aging myself for anyone else. Boyz II Men is, what about the naysayers, right? What about the people like, assessments? Come on, that's not going to help us improve our strategy. What would you say for those naysayers out there who thinks we can't overcome challenges and selection as a whole, and especially when around using assessment tools?
I go back to my quote that I shared just a little bit ago. If you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. There's organizations out there that are already being successful in it. The recruiting industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry because they're getting it right. But I think it comes down to a couple of key things, is that if you're going to involve people in the talent acquisition process, you need to equip them to be experts and highly skilled in the talent acquisition process. So you're in the people business, so you need to understand emotional intelligence inside and out. You need to understand personality inside and out. So it's the people business. You need to understand people. And then you need to be, the tools are out there. We've seen already artificial intelligence and the role it can play in an organization, but the tools are out there. But you need to equip your people for a full-time effort. You can't expect full-time results with people that are dabbling in the process, because you're asking them to do too many other things. So you have to have people that are fully devoted to the talent acquisition process. They need to understand people, they need to understand who they are. They need to be equipped with the tools to be successful, because they're like organizations like Korn Ferry, Spencer Tuitt, Egon Zehnder, Russell Reynolds. I mean, these are all executive search firms that are generating billions of dollars in revenue because they're getting it right. There's no reason that people inside an organization can't do the same thing.
Love that. Linky, if you're there, if you can hear me, how could you not hear this voice? Do you have any questions out there in the universe that we want to maybe talk about?
Yeah, I actually don't see any coming into the chat. Oh, hang on, let me see.
If we thought a comment about my voice, I know it's terrible.
I've gotten one comment just saying how amazing the session was. But yeah, I'm not surprised that there aren't any questions. You guys have covered so much today. I just want to thank you so much again, Carlos, Ed, Janice, and Heather, for such an engaging session. On that note, if there aren't any other questions or final remarks, I will end the webinar, and I wish you all a great day.